I personally expect Nigeria to do better than 3% GDP in 2025. Recall that by Q3, we were growing the Nigerian economy at 3.46. I think 2025 will be better. I certainly hope it will be better. If I said that 2024 was the year of painful reforms, I suspect that 2025 may be the beginning of some turnaround, the beginning of growth, the beginning of, I think I think 2024 may have been the darkest part of the tunnel if we continue adopting the metaphors. We've
Yeah.
taken the maximum in terms of deregulating or appropriate pricing, if you may, harmonizing our FX market. We got the exchange rate to 1,700 at some point. Now it's down slightly. We've taken the full impact of fuel subsidy removal. The market is now totally deregulated. And to better complement that total deregulation of the downstream petroleum, we now have a domestic refining sector with the Warri refinery, the Port Harcourt refinery too, and Dangote refinery. And there are more to come in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah.
So two of the most important drivers of the inflation may have been exhausted. Of course, there's still the insecurity and the impact on food that government still has to confront and resolve. But I'm very positive, and I must say I'm very aligned with the audience. The responses in the poll were very positive, and they very much aligned with my expectations and my assessment of the conditions we have. If you look at all the indicators, many more indicators, GDP growth, the trade surplus, the sectoral performance, not that the sectoral performance is wonderful, but there are no sectors left in recession. The general data, I've mentioned the oil production and the domestication of our refining sector. So generally, there are many positives emerging. And I think Nigerians can look forward with hope in 2025. The high points, and I must say, as a compliment to you, that you're one of the few people who have taken that positive spin on the boldness of the reforms and the attempt to institute some performance management ethic into the cabinet. I have mostly been positive about the reforms, and like your question does, I've also pointed out where I think the gaps are. Let me start with the gaps because I think the highlights are a bit obvious to many, but I'll come to that. So the gaps, I think we need a wider range of policy. In 2023 and 2024, we focused almost exclusively on fuel subsidy and naira dollar dynamics. But there's a lot more. Trade and investment and industrial policy. We've not seen much on that. We need a trade policy. We need an investment strategy to draw foreign direct investment into Nigeria. The president has done the marketing, but we need a concerted, strategically driven marketing approach. Who are we? Which foreign investors are we seeking? Into which sectors? What do we have to offer? What are our sources of comparative advantage? There has to be a strategically driven investment strategy. There needs a trade and industrial policy. And then, of course, we still have challenges with security. We have a lot of expectation around policy, around communications technology. I think we're still waiting in that regard. But the big one is agriculture. Agriculture policy, there's been no significant momentum. We still hear dry season farming, wet season farming, but I think we need some very clear and coherent strategy to promote agriculture. The other thing I would like to see we have a historical opportunity to promote exports with our exchange rates, with the signal that has been sent around the economy. But yet, I think that has to be complemented. So the government has done the bitter work, the hard work. But we now need a strategy to promote exports and to promote and to ease export logistics, focus on ease of business around exports, look at the processes around the ports and the customs. Yeah, there are things that have been said, but when you talk to exporters, I think we still have a long way to go. So those for me may be some of the major gaps, and there may be others. But in terms of the highlights, obviously, and the positive highlight is that finally we got a fully deregulated downstream petroleum sector at a high price, at a lot of inconvenience to the country and to the people, but we got there eventually. And it can only be better. And we've begun to see that improvement as prices have dropped, as global oil prices dropped slightly, and as competition returned to the domestic refining sector. And that can only be better. The other thing is that, yes, we finally stabilized the exchange. We did stabilize it at a rate that was higher than where many analysts and certainly where government hoped the rate would be, but we eventually have stabilized it. And fortunately, towards the end of the year, we also recorded some improvement in that. We saw the oversubscribed Eurobond, we saw the domestic dollar fund, all of those positive steps. And we did see some appreciation on the currency. The third area, which was electricity reforms, especially in terms of tariffs and pricing. There's still some, I suspect there's still some way to go in relation to electricity, but those have been the areas in which some progress have been made. So I would like to distinguish between, just as a prelude to answering the question, the drivers of global inflation and the specific Nigerian dimensions of inflation. Most of the global inflation, especially in the Western world, Western economies, was a post-pandemic effect. During the pandemic, all of those states printed currency, had to reflate their economies to artificially stimulate economic activity, given that the natural demand and supply was constrained by the pandemic. So governments really, I believe they knew what they were doing. They wanted to counteract the COVID impact, spend aggressively, but the cost was higher inflation. And post-COVID, of course, they have used monetary tools, and inflation in the West is normalizing, more or less. In Nigeria, our inflation has been driven by policy since fuel subsidy is gone, and then FX rates are harmonized. But there's been a third driver that we also recognize: insecurity and the impact of food chain, value chains, and food logistics, and so on. So I think that we've exhausted. What do I see going forward in Nigeria? First of all, we've taken out the largest two impacts: the currency and the subsidy, the fuel dimensions. The security dimension remains. There's the possibility that we may add two less dramatic inflation drivers. I mean, these other two, the currency and the fuel subsidies, affect the whole economy. They affect everybody, and they have a huge impact in terms of the weight. We may add some inflation due to telecoms tariffs. We're already hearing demand for 100% increase. I'm hearing that the telcos may get a 40% or so instead. We may also have some adjustments on electricity, like we agreed. We're still some way on having a fully deregulated electricity sector that it does not contain subsidies. If you take those two, they may be significant, but not as significant as the ones we dealt with in 2023 and 2024. So I expect, like our audience also expected in the poll, I expect some moderation in inflation. 34.6 must have been for November or so. Maybe we begin to see some moderation from December, definitely from January. We begin to see inflation peak and then begin to decline. I still think inflation may be significant in 2025, but not at the levels we saw in 2024. But in 2026, I'm very positive that by 2026, we would begin to see a fast deceleration in Nigerian inflation. So that's a positive outlook, a reduction in 2025 and deceleration in 2026, which you mentioned that the government took a bold reform strategy, which might also align with the government's political strategy. Because I want to imagine that the president must have figured that it was better to take all the bitter pills soon after he came into office, rather than towards 2027 for obvious reasons. So we may see, we clearly should expect improvements in the outlook for inflation in 2025 and certainly 2026. Excellent question. Now, so let me start. Interestingly, I would want to start from oil and gas. I think Nigerian upstream oil and gas is back, both upstream and downstream. Like I said, we have a deregulated downstream, we have local refining, and now we're having investments, which is the big news. We're having investments in the upstream. We have the Shell FID, final investment decision, $5 billion, big news. We have Total Energies, I'm hearing figures around $1 billion. We have ExxonMobil indicating that over a period of time, it was going to commit $10 billion in Nigerian oil. I think the government has finally cracked the policy constraints, and I think the IOCs and even Nigerian entities are happy to invest. We also have the Nigerian transactions with ExxonMobil and Seplat, with Oando and ENI, and so at the Shell transaction with Renaissance Africa. So this is not the kind of outlook we had for Nigerian oil and gas in the beginning of 2024. If the difference is as clear as daylight. So that's very positive. So investors should be happy about that. Financial services has been the one man standing in the Nigerian economy in 2024, with excellent rates of growth, while other sectors have been subdued. Like I said, I'm impressed with the way our leading banks are striding into Africa and into the West, into France, into Europe, into Dubai, Hong Kong, all of those things. So the outlook for financial services in Nigeria, and then the activity at the fintech levels has been excellent. And then there's the recapitalization going on, which will further increase capacity. Many of the banks have done well, some of the leading banks have successfully raised capital. Even some tier 2 banks, Fidelity and FCMB, have also done successfully in that regard. So the outlook for financial services is positive, and I think there's value in their equity. Mining is an area which we may add to our list of policy gaps, or at least opportunities. I think policy is working, but we still we're yet to see the impact. I think there was some expectation in the mining sector from the France visit. I hope that materializes. I think in terms of mining, we should also be talking to South Africa, to Canada, to Australia, New Zealand, and the US, the major areas in which there are large mining investments. So that one, if we get our strategy right and our marketing right, should be an opportunity for investment. For trade, I've spoken about the need for a clarity around trade policy, around investment policy, and investment strategy. For the telcos, I personally, in spite of the fact that it will cost me personal pain, I tend to be sympathetic to investors. So I know that while you may see the pain, but if there's no incentive for investment, we all suffer. So let the telcos get some reasonable tariff increase to encourage further investment in the sector, and then they can continue to contribute. Remember, Nigerians should just look at that sector. And remember that in 2001, Nigerian telecoms was less than 1% of GDP. Today is 16%. And why? Because we allowed economic reforms. We were willing to pay for services. We encouraged them to invest, and the impact has been transformative. And the impact has gone beyond pure telecoms into technology and the fintechs, all of those things. So reforms pay if well designed and if well implemented. I honestly believe we need the clarity and vigorous reforms. The kind of reforms that, I'm sorry to mention his name, but he's a good example in that regard. Akinwumi Adesina carried out in his time. We have to understand the value chain. We have to be a bit more sophisticated than all these dry season farming, wet season. We have to look at all the commodity value chains. We have to have a strategy for all of them. So I think we need some policy thinking in the field of agriculture. I believe, there are many trends that have come together in concepts like Dirty December. So Nigerian music has become a global phenomenon. Afrobeats, Nollywood, our entertainment sector, our films have become a well-respected phenomenon on Netflix, on all of these things. So music, arts, entertainment, diaspora, demographics, all of them have come together, and they now present as a huge opportunity for Nigerian culture and tourism. Unfortunately, that sector was one of the policy gaps in which a Ministry of Tourism was identified, a Ministry of Culture was identified. I'm happier now that they both have been merged. I always thought they needed to be together. But now the policy work, the calendar, the promotion, the sensitization, the government not getting in the way, and trying to regulate, but facilitating all of these trends that we've seen, I think is a huge opportunity. It's also one of the advantages of our currency devaluation. So it's suddenly quite cheap. I had on radio some people analyzing it. With $5,000, you could come to Nigeria for 2 weeks, have a good time, go back, and you've not spent too much money.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the impact to us is huge, and so I'm excited by the opportunity. And I don't think it's just about the youths. I think that middle class tourists will soon kick in. I mean, middle-aged tourists will soon kick in. Yes, so it won't just be the young people. I think the opportunity is compelling. And so we should strategize around it. I would like state and federal governments to have a strategy for Dirty December. Lagos appeared to have. So they had all the regattas, they had the the events around the season.
Yeah.
Everywhere have events around the season. And then we should work on security.
No,
okay, let me make a point first of all. I have been impressed in recent years. I had a meeting in towards the end of 2024 with a women's group called Gaia Africa. That
yes.
Bisi Adeyemi
Yes.
of
Guys,
BCCSL had
yes.
something to do with getting me to speak with them. And
Yes.
and I was amazed. For me, it was a moment of a room, a club of women, a room
Yes.
filled with ladies, and
Yes.
asking me to come discuss business. I've done this job for 2 decades, and that was new for me. So I paid more attention in recent times to the strides I see women making in the economy. Someone like yourself, many others, the company on whose platform we're having this conversation. So I think there's a lot going on that is positive. I'm happy about it. And I commend and I celebrate our women folk. I think for me, at the root of social transformation is always education. So I would want to ask policymakers to focus on educating all our children, but in certain regions, particularly the female children. I think the transformative impact of education, there's nothing else you can do that will have the same impact. I see. We're in Western Nigeria, and we pride ourselves as having high educational heritage, but I've been disappointed by the quality of education I see manifested in the young. In states across the west of Nigeria, including, but in the context of our current conversation, particularly the women, particularly the females, which I noticed because I happen to do a lot in relation to women in the Remo and Ijebu areas of Ogun State. So I think I would like to see an improvement in the quality of education. I think that the roles women play in politics need to be elevated beyond just entertaining us at rallies and political meetings. I think we can proceed along the path of putting women on boards. I think that has had a positive impact. Putting women in government. I think President Tinubu, to his credit, tried to include quite a few women, maybe falls below the desired thresholds. But I know there was some conscious effort. I heard about some conscious effort to see that. So I think we're on the right track. If you look at many states in Nigeria, well, for now, they keep making them deputy governors. But maybe one lady somewhere will. And the way the lady in Kogi State, who's a senator, the way she's going, maybe somebody will break that barrier and become the first elected female governor of Nigeria. But I think we should be positive about the developments that have occurred. I would say be positive, adopt a pro-growth strategic posture. I think that the economy may be turning a corner and entering into a growth phase, and you don't want to miss that. So that will be my overriding message. The next thing I would say is, and I tend to say this all the time, is there anything you can export? Is there any service you can sell in global markets? Is there anything you produce that has a market globally? Are there any competencies you can leverage in the global market. The logic of our economy has been twisted towards exports. What remains is for us players in that economy to twist our heads towards exports. I don't see Nigerian businesses making that twist sufficiently. And then my third point, build. I've become, and you said if I'm talking to CEOs, I've become somewhat of a. My focus has always been the economy and strategy, business strategy. But in 2024, I made a decisive turn in my work as an academic, in particular, towards leadership, culture, knowledge management, and governance. So I've suddenly come to the conclusion that, yeah, in the context of strategy and execution, focus on yourself. If you're a CEO, as a leader, your leadership style, your leadership approaches, your leadership effectiveness. Focus on building the right corporate culture in your company. Focus on the right governance. And focus on building a knowledge environment, the appropriate knowledge environment within your company. If you do these things, strategy may take care of itself. Execution may take care of itself. So those will be my three themes: be positive, adopt a growth strategic posture, look for opportunities in the export market, and build your own leadership, your corporate culture, your governance systems, and a knowledge management environment. And then, like the Bible says, I suspect that all other things will follow if you do that. So those will be my messages for CE. I mean, the creative sectors, arts, entertainment, culture, they've already made a showing on our GDP.
Yeah, absolutely.
Music, arts, entertainment is being a big brand aid for the Nigerian brand. And beyond brand, it is now for us. Look at the things our people are doing. Funke Akindele, Jade Oshiberu. Yeah. Many of these ladies, by the way, those two examples. So there's a huge opportunity there. There's a huge opportunity in the creatives. What can government do? I'm always wary of governments, us calling government to come and take over. Sometimes, let me make this point, just so that policymakers can understand my point. What is the major difference between Nigerian sports, Nigerian at the organized national level, and Nollywood, film, music? The absence of government control. Yeah. Football, for instance, has been hobbled, hobbled, constrained, held down because of bureaucrats who see it as an opportunity for corruption rather than a facilitator of the creative energies of our people. So what I would like government to do is, one, not intervene directly. For sports, I would like government to get out of it in terms of control and look for ways of freeing the entrepreneurial and the creative energies of our people. And one step the government took in 2024 that may align with my hopes was the abolition of the Ministry of Sports and returning it to its National Sports Commission. That gets the psyche of it's not a ministerial activity. Yes, there's somebody who should be facilitating the growth, a commission, but its mindset should be as facilitator rather than as controller and regulator. That's what we should The other thing then is to how to fund independent activities in the creative sectors. Bank of Industry, facilities like that, those will help. Funding is a critical sector, especially for independent producers and things like that. But control should be left to the entrepreneurial and creative energies of the people. Okay, thank you very much. The concept of the bottom of the pyramid, which I did a little bit of teaching on in the course of this year, has validated the young people, the poor people, the large mass of relatively poor people as a viable economic market. And if you focus on developments in the fintech side, for instance, we suddenly know that the retail market is viable, it's profitable. The telcos have made a lot of money from the bottom of the pyramid. They thought when the licenses were being given, the assumption everybody had was that the profits were going to be made from the private customers who would have contract phones and so on. But hey, in the end, the telecoms market has made money from the bottom of the pyramid. So one thing the private sector can do is to pay attention to the retail market, to the smaller volume customers, and establish viable business models, as we have seen in case studies, and that many have done with milk, with butter, with all sorts of sachet things. To be fair to the corporate sector, they've done that. But that can continue. The other thing I think the corporates can do, the private sector can do, is to understand to pay greater attention to corporate training, not just its employees, but its supply chain and the people through which it delivers services and all of that. I think that can also make a significant contribution to empowering people, to improving human capital across the economy. The government has a lot of work to do. It still remains largely something that government will do in terms of education quality, public transportation, in terms of skills, training, technical education, all of those things that may help reduce poverty. Now, this is an important question. It's if anything, the government's strategy, the main risk factor in it, apart from social and industrial crisis, which they've negotiated somewhat in 2024, the government, I think, managed to get through 2024 without a breakdown we were reasonably close to riots and anger and public disaffection. So commendations to government. But the other risk is with the debt approach. So we must be conscious of that. And the main recommendation I would have for dealing with that is to focus on growing revenue in the short and medium term. Which government will say, yes, we know that. If I said that to them, they'll say, yes, we know that. That's why we're doing the tax reform process. So the tax reforms are actually very critical. It is important that they succeed. It is important that they're tweaked as government, I think, has tried to do, so that they vastly raise revenue without imposing additional pressure on the poor. And I think that seems to be the logic of the reforms. So they raise the threshold for income tax, but then try to increase VAT on luxurious foods or luxury goods or other goods while removing VAT on necessities. So I think that logic is good. It remains to be seen whether it will achieve the increases in revenues that we anticipate. It remains to be seen whether we will succeed in passing the legislation. So for those who, for me, one of the, I've grown my capacity to absorb all sorts of debates in public conversation. But one thing that really annoyed me in recent times was people saying, what's the rush? It took us 20 years to sign PIB. Why are you in a hurry to sign? And I think the raising Nigerian revenues are some sort of emergency. If you focus on our debt situation, it should be clear to you that we need to rapidly ramp up our revenues to avoid future debt distress. So I would, I would, in this case, you would plead with the political actors, with the regime, the president, and all of that to do all the negotiations that are required and ensure that we have this revenue reforms process concluded in a timely manner so that we can begin to attempt to grow our revenues. We need dramatic increase in the revenues that come to the Nigerian state. First of all, let me make the point that if government was sufficiently focused on how to communicate the reforms and how to make them publicly acceptable, and I've said this in other fora, it would have placed an anti-corruption drive in front, a cost of governance reduction drive next to it, and then come with painful reforms. And it doesn't mean that those reforms could not have happened at the same time they happened, but we would have, in communication, recognized the need to place those issues of reducing our cost of governance, becoming more efficient as a government, and dealing with corruption. Not doing so endangered the reforms, threatened the success of them, undermined public acceptability of the reforms, and they needed us, those of us who supported the reforms, to be a bit stoic and focused on the outcomes. But our job may have been easier if we had placed those conversations ahead of the reforms, or at least side by side with the reforms. I think we cannot avoid those conversations, however, even from purely political motives. The people want to see action. They want to feel that government is also taking some of the pain that they have had to take. So, and the government itself has an opportunity. There was conversation in the course of 2024 about the Olonsoye reforms. The work had been done. The institution had been dimensioned. Which ones can be merged with which can be which are duplications, which can be abolished. All of that work had been done in a fairly rigorous process by somebody who had enough experience of the federal bureaucracy to do it. He was head of the civil service. So that process needs to, but suddenly with the conversation about the Olonsoye reports has disappeared, like you said, there's been subsided. We would like that conversation to go back onto the front burner. The puppet institutions in the National Assembly and in the executive need to reactivate that conversation. And then we need to see some action on the anti-corruption field as well, especially focused on the subnationals, the states, and the local governments. Because most Nigerians believe that we have not seen enough value for the vastly increased revenues that have gone to the subnationals. We We've generally hold the federal government accountable, but we don't focus on our states and our local governments, the closest to us, and the institutions that can best attend to poverty and the basic needs of the people. So I think those conversations around corruption, cost of governance, government efficiency have to move back to center stage. Okay, thank you. Excellent way to conclude. Let me break that into two conversations. One, the macro risks, the national risks, and then for CEOs, company-specific issues. So at the level of, yes, everything could be headed north. We could just move into Nigeria rising. I have three scenarios: Nigeria rising, status quo, Nigeria rising, status quo, and then over the cliff. The conversations we've had suggest a strong possibility of Nigeria rising. But the risk factors are mostly associated with politics and security, national politics, national political stability, regionalization of politics, the return of north-south perspectives, or all of those things, terrorism, insurgency. Those are where the risk factors mostly come from. The major risk factor that is economic, we've alluded to, and that's the fiscal risk as we accumulate debt. But we can manage that, as we've seen, if we raise revenues. The politics can undermine everything, as has been threatened with, for instance, the tax reform process. So we need to pay attention to our politics. We need to prevent it from this all-out regionalization that always threatens to manifest when there is struggle for power, because they could move us over the cliff. Now, at the corporate level, I would clearly, as of course, CEOs probably know everything I'm going to say. We must pay a lot of attention to cyber risks. They're becoming center stage as business models are digitalized and all of that. The main drawback, and we saw in 2024. We saw that in 2024 in several financial institutions and fintechs, that those risks, those cyber risks can actually hit you. So yeah, that would be a significant one. And then, of course, people issues, JAPA, skills, competencies, capacity development, knowledge management, all of those issues, I would say would be a second one. So I think that the government needs to manage the country risk. CEOs need to pay attention to those corporate risks. So until I recall, I've studied this economy very closely for the last 20 years. And I recall that at a point when Obasanjo was president, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was Minister of Finance, Charles Soludo was Central Bank Governor, our FX market became self-funded. The foreign investments were flooding in. Nigeria was #1 for investments in Africa. MTN was flowing money, Airtel, everybody. And then the CBN did not have to fund our FX market. That's the ideal I'm looking for, and we're far from there. Because now we've seen the early investment commitments come, especially in the oil and gas sector. I mentioned Shell. Shell was the big win of 2024. But by the time we have more, and not just in oil and gas, manufacturing, infrastructure, hospitality, hotels, big hotel chains, things are happening, and they're consistent and continuous. Then we will find an equilibrium regarding our FX, and then we will know where the exchange rate is. Until we get that where the sustainable exchange rate is, until we get to that equilibrium, there could be surprises. But I think we've seen the worst in 2024. I think that we may have established that 1,000, 1,800, 1,700, 800 may be our upper threshold for now, and then we can test whether it can be better. Many Nigerians, we've gotten attached to ECOWAS. ECOWAS is a Nigerian project, and I am one of those. And it's somewhat of a slap on our face, that there's a risk of some level of disintegration of ECOWAS. I also see the President Macron of France was pointing out a few days ago that, well, you're all asking us to leave now, but for us, you would not have survived as sovereign nations from the jihadist onslaught that happened some years back. And even though he was derided by most people, I think he was right. And I think that the return of that jihadist threat in countries like Niger, Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, next time that threat manifests, there may be no rescue for those countries. So I worry about that. And I suspect that what we're discussing may happen. It's easy to expel the French, but do you have sufficient control over your security variables to preserve your countries from an incipient jihadist threat that has not been eliminated in many of these countries across the middle of them? So that is a concern, the economic concern, the threat to this sustainability of ECOWAS is a concern. I hope that I suspect that after the initial saber rattling and appearance that President Tinubu in his early days was willing to go to war to force those people back, I think a more recent strategy has emerged, and I want that they continue on that approach. Diplomacy, assurance building, communication, negotiation. I think those countries are, for good reason, a bit paranoid about Nigeria's increasing closeness to France. I see that they can't sleep, the presidents of those countries. They're very uncomfortable. but I think the president just needs to assure them that no, we're pursuing our own interest in our relationship with France. It's not about you. and just to engage deeply at the diplomatic level to see if there are any assurances we can offer this. Well, I repeat my basic message. Be positive. I think we should all adopt a pro-growth strategic posture. During COVID, for instance, this recommended strategic posture was just maintenance. How do I survive? But now we should posture for growth and look for those, pay attention to those opportunities. Like I said, President Tinubu's reforms have twisted the logic of the Nigerian economy, and we need to twist our strategies accordingly. I'm very positive, and finally, Nigerians have a role to play. In 2024, one of my biggest concerns was I use the word negativity about Nigeria. I say it with some understanding though, because people were enduring pain. Some people are still unhappy about the 2023 elections. I think we should turn a leaf. We should focus on the prosperity of the country and of ourselves. And we shouldn't pull the house down just to get some emotional satisfaction. So those would be my parting words.